So last night, me and my friend Davidson, we went to see Godzilla Minus One. It's a very confusing name, but it's a very good movie. Um, I've always been more of a casual fan of Godzilla. I have of course seen the original Japanese movie from the 50s. I've seen all of the Legendary Pictures Monsterverse movies, and those are very fun movies. But outside of that, most of my main Godzilla knowledge and experiences come from watching Cinemassacre's Godzilla-thon, and I have also played Godzilla Unleashed on my Wii back in the day, so I like Godzilla. I like giant monsters, but it's also been kind of a genre I'm sort of been lacking full experience in, I guess you could say. One thing that's kind of note for Godzilla for discussing this movie, the kind of fluctuating tone and point of Godzilla movies, because there are movies that are dark and are very much focused on thematic elements relating to World War II, especially the nuclear destruction that Japan faced at the very end of that. But then you get the movies where it's the giant rubber monster fighting another giant rubber monster, where Godzilla does a weird drop kick where he dances up in the air. Then, of course, there'll be action movies for Godzilla that are a bit more serious and sci-fi heavy, but it's just kind of the dichotomy of Godzilla, you could say. So this movie falls into the former. It's set like right after World War II. It is a period piece, which is very fun. We get a lot of, especially since the Legendary Pictures movies, and even Shin Godzilla, which is a very dark movie that deals with like the destructive element of Godzilla, is set during the modern time of when that movie was released. There was a little bit of discussion online about this movie, mainly in comparison to the Monsterverse movies, about how the human characters in Godzilla Minus One are way better than the human characters in any of the Legacy Picture movies, and how America just doesn't get Godzilla. Now, I like the Legendary Pictures movies a lot, and I gotta say, it's not that those movies don't have good human characters, it's just they always make the same mistake of killing off the best human characters. Bryan Cranston, John Goodman, I'm blanking on his name, I'm so sorry, but God, I'm gonna feel like such a jerk for forgetting his name. But the Let Them Fight guy, who's for a good decade was kind of like Hollywood's go-to for an Asian guy. I'm very sorry, but it's the truth. They were very like only one allowed. But anyways, those were all fine characters, but then they all die, so we're kind of left with the boring slate characters. And really, what I kind of gather more from that, especially like when comparing this movie to not only the American Monsterverse movies, but other Godzilla movies, where the more action-packed Godzilla movies, especially the ones that have Godzilla fighting multiple monsters, is that the human plot is more in service to the monsters, to explain what the monsters are up to and why the monsters are fighting. But in this movie, Godzilla's purpose is for the human plot line. And I think that's very interesting. Because Godzilla's not in this movie a lot. I'd say there are four major Godzilla scenes. And of course they're all really good. when the movie is about how terrifying Godzilla can be, like when comparing it to the action packed Godzilla versus another monster movie, where your brain kind of turns off. It's like, yeah, Godzilla smashed Ghidorah's head into one of the buildings, and then like jabbed an antenna into one of his eyes. But then you go to this movie, you go to Shin Godzilla, and you go to the original Godzilla, and you're kind of like, oh yeah, Godzilla's breath just completely annihilates hundreds and potentially thousands of people. It is horrifying. So yeah, the action scenes are very suspenseful. There's a lot of just like kind of in awe of the destruction in a more terrifying way, instead of the awe as in a yeah way. As I believe I've said this, I've tried to record this a few times. This movie is a period piece. It's set at the right after World War II, and the main character. This movie deals very heavily with the soldiers that actually came back after World War II and the Japanese side of things. It was very interesting. It just like it's like watching trying to make the reconstruction, like watching that reconstruction era of Japan, watching people try to readjust to life after so much death had happened, the changing of the guard, of how Japan should act moving forward. I guess as an outsider of that, because obviously several decades later, on the opposite side of the world, that's a very interesting element, and the main characters very much are kind of in top, like the main character specifically is very much intertwined with that theme. He was originally a kamikaze pilot, but he obviously didn't go through with that style of attack, and especially when I really don't want to spoil in my reviews, especially for good movies, but you get the sense of like the guilt of potentially of letting his country down, but more so of letting the fellow soldiers that actually did die in the war and to Godzilla down. Is a very strong. It is probably one of the strongest main characters I've seen in any of the Godzilla movies. I like the original one, but even then, like, the most interesting character in that movie is a character you meet halfway through the movie. So, and of course, that character is also tied into very heavy, like, discussion about the advancement of weapons following World War II. So there is all that, all very strong, writing and thematic theming throughout the movie. Cinematography is good. One thing that you absolutely need to get down in a giant monster movie is cinematography. You need, especially if you're doing one where like you're dealing with the horror of the destruction that happens for it. You need to get the right shots of how gigantic Godzilla is, the barren wastelands he creates. And this movie does that. This movie does it very well. Godzilla isn't as weirdly mobile as he is in the Legacy pictures. He kind of... They did this in Shin Godzilla too, but he moves like he would if he was still a guy in a rubber suit, which is, even though he's still a CGI creation in this movie, which is fine by me. If I can start geeking out on getting to the nerdier side of like the little things that I like as a more casual Godzilla fan. Godzilla's design in this movie is really good. His face looks much more similar to he did in the 80s and the 90s during the Heisei era than he does like in the Legacy Pictures movies or in the Millennium era. And which is good because I like the look of the Heisei movies a lot from what I've seen of them. The way his atomic breath in this, or they call it a heat ray in this movie rather than the atomic breath, where instead of just his spine's glowing, which they do, they like also like jut up a bit along his back as he charges up, and that's a neat little detail. But the detail I really like. This is like visual kind of like geeking out about it, but I think it works because of what Godzilla is supposed to be. Instead of just it being kind of a generic like energy breath attack like you see in most of the other Godzilla movies, that when the atomic breath hits something, it has like a mushroom cloud effect when it like goes, when it hits, when something explodes, obviously. And I'm kind of surprised none of the other Godzilla movies have ever done that, considering. But yeah, this is more of the thinking man's Godzilla movie. If you're going into this for the action, there is good action in this movie, but this is mainly a story about people. There's a found family element to the movie, which is really cute. Again, I don't really want to spoil all of it, but it definitely, like, people, like the main guy, upon coming home and finding just kind of his home destroyed, he runs into a woman who's just trying to survive, who's holding on to a baby who isn't even her baby. The baby's mother died. So the unlikely trio come together mainly because they have to. If they didn't, and yeah, it's very, very heartfelt in a lot of places. Not a whole lot else I can say without spoiling the movie, which I really want to avoid. But it's a very good thinking man's kaiju giant monster movie. I'd say it is one of my more preferred movies of the year I've seen. If you're a fan of Godzilla, but you're also not afraid of a monster movie taking a step back and being about the people, one of the few times where it works, unlike the 2014 Godzilla movie, I think that movie's fun, but it's kind of boring, especially after Bryan Cranston dies in it. But if you're fine watching a Godzilla movie that deals more so with the people that have struggled and are just pulling together through it, and especially pulling together through the aftermath of World War II, only to run into a giant monster. This is a very good movie for that, and that's a good way of putting it. One final nerdy thing to say, probably the best use of the Godzilla theme since Kingdom of Monsters. I can't believe I don't think they played it at all in Godzilla vs. Kong. That's crazy, but yeah, they play the Godzilla theme, and it's done in instead of like they do play it to emphasize how big and mighty Godzilla is, but there is a moment where that's kind of a fuck yeah moment for the heroes, so that's fun. I think go over nitpicks for my problems with the movie. Again, it goes on spoilers, so it relates to the ending where it's kind of weirdly rushed, and it also it feels like it kind of undermines the climax of the movie. If you see it, you probably understand what I'm going for, but if you haven't seen it, it's going to sound like gibberish. But I guess a heads up is never a bad thing. So yeah, Godzilla -1, weird ass name. I do not understand that name. You'd think it sounds like a prequel, but it's not a prequel. And even if it was a prequel, wouldn't it be called Godzilla 0? So if they make a sequel to this movie, which I don't know if they do, because Shin Godzilla also ended on a weird note, but then they never made a sequel to Shin Godzilla. So this movie could very much go the same way. But what would the sequel to Godzilla -1 be? Would it just be Godzilla 0? Would it be Godzilla 1? Because you have to add +1 to... Or would it be Godzilla -2? To subtract? Who's to say? Anyways, I'm gonna go now. I'm clearly wishing that I had my friend Davidson to help me clear my thoughts a bit more. But anyway, good movie. Still, Holdovers is still probably my favorite movie of the year. Then Spider-Verse. But then I'm pretty sure Godzilla -1 is top 3 for this year. I liked it a lot. Godzilla fans, obviously, you gotta see it. Non-Godzilla fans, you can give it a chance.